Good evening and welcome to the Central Ohio Nature Thursday night Nature Happy Hour. I am your host, Don Kloss. I am a naturalist. I am what is called a master naturalist. I took a course called the Ohio Certified Volunteer Naturalist Program, which is sponsored by Ohio State University, and in the Central Ohio area is run by Preservation Parks of Delaware County. I am a volunteer at Columbus and Franklin County Metro Parks and am also a volunteer at the Ohio Wildlife Center in Powell. I am a field science volunteer for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, where my main project is doing stream quality monitoring at the Big Darby Creek near Circleville. I am also a member of the Ohio Rock and Mineral Society. Though it does not say this here, I am also a member of Friends of Metro Parks and a member of Friends of the Ravines. I hold a BS in secondary education from the Ohio State University. My partner, who is not here this evening, is Christy Holmes, who is also a naturalist. She too is a volunteer at the Columbus and Franklin County Metro Parks and is a master naturalist. She is an incredible wildlife photographer and a rock hound and fossil collector with a very impressive collection. She holds a BS from Georgetown University in language and linguistics. Now, to give just a brief introduction, what does a naturalist do? We study nature, which includes plants, animals, geology, water, weather, and sometimes also, along with geology, geography. We also help others to enjoy nature by sharing, and this is really the biggest part of what we do. We give programs such as this one, lead nature hikes, do teaching of outdoors skills like archery and fishing. When we are working in the parks, we answer questions for and help park visitors, and we care for injured and sick animals. So, to get right into things, agriculture and nature, part one. They live hand in hand, and they do affect each other. That is mainly agriculture affecting nature, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that. So, agricultural areas actually provide wildlife habitats, and they are somewhat fragile, and depending on what's going on a farm can be balanced on the head of a pin. And we're going to go through a few of the different types of wildlife habitats on farms that you may not think about. One of them, which is shown in this picture, is tree lines. Now, for the farmers, the tree lines are a good thing because they provide wind breaks on their fields, which help prevent the wind from blowing away the topsoil on their fields. If you don't have any topsoil left on your field, it's no good for growing, and you can't just bring in truckloads of soil and spread it. Another one, which everybody's seen, and you probably don't think about, is fence rows or hedgerows. And These are areas along fences where you have brush, shrubbery, thick layers of grasses, wildflowers like you see in this photo here. Those again provide windbreaks for the farmers' fields, which is why they allow those. It's also something that they don't want to have to maintain. There's no real reason for them to keep things cut low along fences. It doesn't provide any benefit to them. It's better if they leave them grow. And it does provide habitat for all sorts of animals. And when you have the wildflowers like you do in these photos here, it is beneficial for our pollinators, the bees, the butterflies, the moths, even animals, because animals such as coyote, deer, etc., they brush up against these plants and they spread pollen and seeds that collect on their fur and then eventually get blown off or brushed off. Another one, which we'll talk about in more detail in part 2, is what is called wet ditches. And I'm sure everybody has seen these too. These are ditches that run in between farm fields and between farm fields and roads, and are pretty much always standing with water. The purpose they serve for the farmers is strictly to have a way for water, excess water, to drain out of farm fields and for that water to go someplace so that their fields are not always saturated. If their fields are saturated, they can't work the land, they can't run the machinery. And for certain animals, some reptiles and amphibians, but mainly certain types of birds, this provides habitat for them, especially during nesting season. Then we have tree stands, or what some people call woodlots. And the tree stands are big groupings or small groupings of trees like you see in these two photos. Again, they provide windbreaks so that the farmers don't have soil erosion from wind. These are kind of a holdover from older times where farmers had a lot more livestock roaming and grazing. This provided areas of shelter and shade for them. That's not so much the case anymore. Farmers don't, the ones that deal in livestock don't do so much grazing, and we'll talk about that more in part 2. And then the final one is not so often seen, but it does exist, and that is what is called crop field wetlands. And this is where farmers have, where they are able to planted crops right up against the parts of wetlands that stand in water. And if you can see where my cursor is pointing, all this green here, that's where crops have actually been planted up against where you have watery areas of the wetlands. These other areas, like you see over here, would be either filled with reeds and cattails, or the ground would just be too mushy all the time for them to plant, so they don't use that. But if they've got a wetland on their property, they will go up against it, use it as much as they can. And that provides a great habitat for animals, mostly birds and migratory birds. It's a good place for them to hide and nest. It's a good resting place for them, especially waterfowl and shorebirds. There's water there for them. So it's a big benefit to them. Oh, this is actually the last one. This is the surprise bonus. Crop fields. Crop fields themselves are a habitat for animals. And some animals and birds, like we know, deer and crows will go after the corn. Deer will go after the soybeans. In the wintertime and the fall, after everything's been harvested, whatever kernels of corn and soybeans didn't make it into the hopper from the harvesters and are laying on the ground, that provides food for the deer for a lot of the fall and winter. But during the warmer weather, while the crops are actually growing, it does provide cover for mammals. And if we talk about mammals like raccoons, skunks, possums, they eat arthropods, meaning insects, certain types of them, and the fields are full of them. They also dig up and eat grubs. And something like corn, if it is not sprayed, attracts a lot of grubs. So that's kind of a feasting area for those animals. Home sweet home. All 6 of those habitats are home to migratory and non-migratory birds, as I mentioned, reptiles and amphibians, mammals, insects, and apex predators. Obviously, wherever you have nesting birds, wherever you have birds that nest on the ground, wherever you have the smaller mammals, particularly rabbits and squirrels that will live in these different habitats, you will have coyotes and foxes, and you will have hawks of the different species and falcons and so on. So in the words of Thomas Dolby, I feel machinery. We are going to take a little turn here. And I'm going to have to go back a slide. Sorry about that. Now, we have to look at farm machinery when we talk about these habitats. These are some sales posters from the 1950s for farm harvesters. And at this point in time, the average width of the reel, which is this part that scoops up the grain, was 15 feet wide. And actually, if you look at this Massey Harris in the middle, 12-foot wide reel. But this case in particular had a 15-inch wide. And note this price. We're going to talk about this in a second. $5,900. So it really took some work to get through all the fields with a machine like that. Because if you look at this fields, this farmer right here, and that's a barn. He's probably got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fields here to work. And, these are good sized fields. And when you're only harvesting 15 feet of crop at a time, it takes quite a while. So what we've ended up with today, we have what you see on the left versus what you have on the right. And I'm sure everybody has seen, as you have driven places, farm fields that are so large, they almost look like they stretch as far as the eye can see, uninterrupted, unbroken. And there's a reason for this. On the left, what we used to have that was prevalent was called diversified farming. And what that meant was, say for this farmer here that we were looking at, he might grow corn in this field, soybeans in this field, hay in this field, maybe some more corn in this field. Maybe this was grazing land for livestock. And now we've gone to something called intensive cropping, where all of their land is used to grow one single crop, like you see here. And this just happens to be cotton. So from the 1960s to today, we went to that, where almost every farmer has made that step. And why? It's more lucrative. It's a bigger risk for the farmers, but if they do it just right, there's more money in it. They only have to deal with one market instead of trying to make the best of a bunch of markets. And it's actually less overhead for them. You don't have to deal with different variations on your machinery for harvesting different crops, plus dealing with everything that's involved in raising livestock. So it's more financially beneficial for them overall. Now, how do they accomplish that? Here's one part of it. Here's a 2020 harvester made by John Deere. Remember that 15-foot wide reel? Well, look at it now. The reel is now an average of 40 to 61 feet wide. Much, much wider than what used to be the case. And here, this is the John Deere T700, brand new, 2021 model. And it takes up to I believe, 60-foot reel. It is, remember our case that we looked at a few slides ago that was $5,900 in the 50s? Well, this thing brand new today is $200,000, not including that reel. The reel is probably another $150,000. So you're looking at about $350,000 to $375,000 just for a harvester, a piece of machinery that you're only going to use once a year. So that's kind of, because you're talking about the price of a very large house, this is part of where the risk comes in, because this is a mortgage for them. In order to use those big machines, they can't use them on those little, what seem now like little farm fields. They've got to adjust those farm fields so that they can efficiently run those big machines. How do they do that? unfortunately, removal of wildlife habitats. They take out fence and hedgerows. They remove tree lines by cutting down the trees and digging out the stumps. The same thing with tree stands and woodlots. They are disappearing quickly. And the same thing for wetlands. They actually create new ditches to drain those wetlands. And then once they've dried out, they plow them up and they plant. The effect of it is this: in the Corn Belt states, which is Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri, there has been a wetland loss of 80 to 95%. And again, that's huge habitat for migratory and non-migratory birds, and also reptile and amphibian species. It's a pasture land loss of 53%, partially because of something called intensified animal farming, which we'll talk more about in part 2, and a loss of hedgerows, fence rows, and tree lines of 30 to 80%. And you might ask, if they are getting rid of the hedgerows, the fence rows, the tree lines, what are they doing in terms of soil erosion? Are they risking more soil erosion? Are they losing topsoil by doing this? I have the answer to that in part 2. And it's kind of, well, it's kind of complicated, and unfortunately, it can be bad for wildlife habitats, as we will investigate. And just to let you know where this information came from, I got it from, all of it in this presentation, from a paper that I refer to quite often, a research paper by Rolf R. Coford and Lewis B. Best, which is titled Management of Agricultural Landscapes for the Conservation of Neotropical Migratory Birds. Those two gentlemen work out of the Iowa Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit in the Department of Animal Ecology at the Iowa, hard not to say Ohio, Iowa State University. And they published that in 1995, which is a while ago, but everything in that almost 260-page research paper is very, very relevant today still, which is why I still refer to it. That is it for our first part of agriculture and nature. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we will post part 2 very shortly. So please stay with us. Thank you very much for joining.